Most people spend their entire lives desperately seeking God outside themselves, praying to distant deities, studying ancient texts, and visiting holy places. They never realize the profound mystical truth that Joel Goldsmith discovered through decades of direct spiritual experience and contemplation. The Christ you've been searching for in churches, books, temples, and through countless teachers has never actually left you for even a single moment. It's not a historical figure who lived 2,000 years ago, nor some distant divine being sitting on a heavenly throne judging your every thought and action. This isn't mere religious sentiment, wishful thinking, or New Age philosophy. This is the fundamental reality of your very being that transforms absolutely everything about your life experience when it becomes your lived understanding rather than just intellectual knowledge. The Christ is the divine consciousness that constitutes your very essence, your true spiritual identity that exists before and beyond all thoughts, emotions, circumstances, conditions, or any temporary human experiences that seem to define you. Joel Goldsmith discovered this revolutionary truth not through years of theological study in seminaries or through reading countless spiritual books, but through profound, direct mystical experience that came to him during deep states of spiritual contemplation and communion with divine consciousness. After spending years seeking God through traditional religious channels and finding only temporary satisfaction, he experienced a moment of pure recognition that changed everything. In that instant, he realized that the Christ had never been separate from him, not even for a millisecond. The moment this understanding dawned in his consciousness, his entire life experience underwent complete transformation. Chronic illnesses that had plagued him for years disappeared without medical intervention. Financial lack that had created constant worry simply vanished as abundance began flowing naturally. But here's what most people completely miss about Joel's profound teaching. Understanding that Christ lives within you isn't about believing something with your rational mind or accepting it as religious doctrine that you must have faith in despite lack of evidence. This recognition is about discovering the divine consciousness that's actually reading these very words right now. The awareness that exists behind all your thoughts, emotions, and sensory experiences. The pure consciousness that observes your mental activity is Christ consciousness itself expressing as your individual being. When you truly understand that Christ lives in you, something absolutely miraculous happens to your entire relationship with problems, challenges, difficulties, and all the circumstances that have been causing you stress, worry, fear, and frustration throughout your human experience. Instead of fighting against circumstances or desperately trying to change conditions through willpower, manipulation, or endless effort, you begin to recognize that the divine consciousness within you is already completely whole, perfect, and lacking absolutely nothing. This doesn't mean that problems disappear instantly like magic, but your fundamental relationship to them transforms so completely that even the same exact circumstances feel entirely different when experienced from this recognition of your true spiritual identity. You begin to experience what Joel called divine indifference, which is not callousness or lack of caring about human suffering, but rather a profound inner peace that remains completely unshaken regardless of whatever outer appearances may be presenting themselves in your experience. Fear begins losing its grip on your consciousness because you finally know your true identity as spiritual being, rather than identifying yourself as vulnerable human personality subject to all the random forces and circumstances that seem to control ordinary human experience. Most people experience brief glimpses of this profound truth during deep meditation, prayer, or moments of natural beauty. But then they lose this recognition completely when faced with challenging situations that trigger old patterns of fearful thinking and reactive emotions. The secret that Joel discovered and taught is learning to maintain this recognition of your divine nature consistently throughout all daily life activities, seeing every single situation as a perfect opportunity to express and demonstrate your inherent spiritual nature rather than reacting from limited human personality. Here's the absolutely revolutionary aspect that separates Joel's teaching from virtually all conventional spirituality and religious approaches. You don't need to become spiritual, achieve enlightenment, earn God's love, or attain some special state that you currently lack through years of discipline and effort. You simply need to recognize and acknowledge what you already are in this very moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something you must develop, cultivate, or achieve through spiritual practices. It's something you discover has always been fully present as your true identity. This recognition completely transforms your entire approach to living. Instead of constantly trying to get something from God through prayer, you begin naturally expressing as God through every thought, word, and action that flows from your recognition of your divine nature. Instead of seeking healing from some external source, you recognize your inherent wholeness that has never actually been damaged or diminished by any appearance of illness or limitation. Instead of pursuing abundance, you express from the infinite supply that exists within your own consciousness. When this understanding becomes your lived reality, rather than just an interesting concept, people around you begin experiencing healing and transformation simply by being in your presence, without you doing anything special or trying to help them in any way whatsoever. This is exactly how Joel was able to facilitate healing for thousands of people throughout his ministry, without ever claiming to heal anyone, or taking credit for any of the miraculous transformations that occurred in people's lives through contact with his consciousness. He simply remained consistently conscious of spiritual truth about himself and others, creating an atmosphere where people could recognize their own divine nature and experience the natural healing that flows from that recognition of their true spiritual identity. Let me share with you some specific examples of how this recognition has transformed real people's lives in practical, measurable ways that demonstrate the power of understanding that Christ lives in you as your actual identity rather than as religious belief. Sarah had suffered from chronic anxiety disorder for 15 long years, trying every available therapy, medication, breathing technique, cognitive behavioral approach, and healing modality she could find, spending thousands of dollars seeking relief from the constant worry and fear that dominated her daily experience. When she first encountered Joel's teaching about Christ consciousness being her true identity, she initially dismissed it as impractical religious platitudes that couldn't possibly help with her very real psychological and physical symptoms that were seriously impacting her ability to function normally. But something deep within her consciousness recognized the ring of truth in these words. She began practicing simply acknowledging the divine presence within her throughout each day, especially during moments when anxiety was particularly intense and overwhelming. Instead of fighting the anxiety or trying to make it go away through various techniques, she would silently recognize her true spiritual identity as divine consciousness temporarily experiencing human emotions, which created space between her true self and the temporary emotional weather. Within just a few weeks, something fundamental began shifting in Sarah's entire experience. The anxiety didn't disappear overnight like magic, but her relationship to it changed so completely that the same feelings no longer had the power to disturb her inner peace and stability. She began experiencing a deep, unshakable peace underlying all surface emotions, like discovering still water beneath turbulent waves. The chronic muscle tension that had plagued her for years started releasing naturally without any physical therapy or relaxation techniques. By the third month of consistent practice, people began commenting on her presence. There was a quality of stillness, peace, and quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from her without any effort on her part, creating a calming effect on everyone around her. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Michael discovered this truth through severe financial crisis that threatened to destroy everything he had worked for throughout his adult life. After his business failed and debts mounted to overwhelming proportions, he felt completely desperate and abandoned by God, questioning everything he had believed about spiritual principles. A close friend introduced him to Joel Goldsmith's teachings about divine sonship and infinite supply, but Michael struggled to see how abstract spiritual concepts could possibly solve his very concrete practical problems like mortgage payments and business obligations. The breakthrough came when he completely stopped trying to use spiritual truth as a technique to fix his dire financial situation, and instead began living from the recognition of his spiritual identity as consciousness, in which infinite supply already exists as present reality. He started each day acknowledging the unlimited abundance within his own consciousness, not as a method for attracting money or manipulating circumstances, but a simple recognition of what was already true about his spiritual nature regardless of bank account balances. New opportunities began appearing in the most unexpected ways. Former clients he hadn't heard from in years contacted him with profitable projects. Investment opportunities surfaced through casual conversations that led to significant returns he never could have planned or anticipated. But far more importantly than the improved financial circumstances, Michael's entire relationship to security and abundance underwent complete transformation. He no longer lived in constant fear and worry about money, because he finally understood that his true source was the infinite consciousness within him. Within 8 months, not only had his financial situation completely turned around with all debts paid and savings restored, but he had discovered a level of prosperity consciousness that continues expressing abundantly in his life many years later. The real miracle wasn't the money, but the recognition that he had never actually been separate from his source of supply, which is the infinite creative intelligence that expresses as his individual consciousness and attracts everything needed for abundant living. Then there's Margaret's profound healing journey that demonstrates the power of recognizing Christ consciousness as actual identity. Doctors had given her only 6 months to live due to advanced cancer that had spread throughout her body and wasn't responding to conventional medical treatments. Traditional chemotherapy and radiation had failed to slow the progression of her condition, and she felt hopeless, angry, and terrified about leaving her young children without a mother. When someone suggested that Christ consciousness was her true identity, she initially felt furious that anyone would offer spiritual platitudes during such a medical crisis. But in her darkest moment of despair, something deep inside her consciousness was willing to consider that there might be a truth about her identity that existed beyond medical diagnoses and prognostic statistics based on statistical averages of similar cases. She began spending time each day not praying desperately for healing or trying to bargain with God, but simply resting in the quiet recognition of her spiritual wholeness that existed prior to any physical condition or medical label that attempted to define her. The shift in Margaret's consciousness began very subtly. Instead of identifying herself as a person with cancer who might die, she started recognizing herself as eternal spiritual consciousness, temporarily experiencing physical challenges that were not her true identity. This wasn't denial of the medical condition or refusal to continue appropriate treatment, but rather recognition of her deeper identity that remained whole and perfect, regardless of what appeared to be happening to her physical form, which she now understood as temporary expression rather than her actual self. Her next series of medical tests showed improvement that her oncologist described as highly unusual, given the advanced stage and aggressive nature of her particular type of cancer. The tumor markers that had been steadily rising began dropping significantly without explanation. 6 months later, all traces of cancer had completely disappeared from her body, verified by multiple tests and scans. But Margaret consistently insists that the real healing wasn't physical. It was the recognition of who she truly was beyond any temporary physical experience. These aren't isolated incidents, special cases, or rare exceptions that only happen to particularly spiritual people. When you truly understand that Christ lives in you as your actual identity, these kinds of transformations become natural expressions of your spiritual nature rather than miraculous exceptions to normal life. The key is moving completely beyond intellectual understanding or emotional belief to lived recognition of your divine nature that remains constant regardless of changing circumstances, emotions, thoughts, or any temporary experiences that come and go in your human awareness. Joel taught that miracles aren't violations of natural law or supernatural interventions that override normal reality, but rather expressions of spiritual law operating at a higher level than material appearances that most people accept as ultimate reality. When you truly know yourself as spiritual consciousness, rather than limited human personality, you naturally begin expressing the inherent qualities of that consciousness: wholeness, abundance, love, peace, wisdom, and creative power that transforms every area of your life experience. Now let's explore specific practical techniques that help anchor this recognition in your daily experience, so it becomes your lived reality rather than just inspiring concepts that you think about occasionally during quiet moments, but forget when faced with challenging circumstances. The first technique Joel taught was maintaining what he called the listening attitude throughout your day. This isn't trying to hear God speak to you in words or waiting for mystical experiences. but maintaining gentle awareness of the divine presence within your consciousness during all activities. Start by taking brief moments throughout your day to simply pause and silently acknowledge, "The Christ that I am is present right now." Don't try to feel anything special or achieve any particular spiritual state. Simply recognize this truth about your identity in this present moment. This practice gradually shifts your center of identity from personality, circumstances, emotions, and thoughts to the changeless divine consciousness within you, allowing you to experience what Joel called living by grace, where divine wisdom guides decisions naturally. The second practical technique involves what Joel termed knowing the truth about others in every interaction and relationship. When you encounter someone experiencing challenges, difficulties, illness, or any form of limitation, instead of sympathizing with their problems, silently recognize their spiritual identity. See them as divine consciousness appearing in human form, rather than identifying them with their temporary circumstances, personality patterns, or the problems they may be experiencing. This recognition has profound effects on all your relationships and interactions. People begin sensing something different in your presence, a quality of acceptance and recognition that allows their own divine nature to surface naturally. Many report feeling mysteriously peaceful, inspired, or clear about solutions after being with someone who practices this recognition consistently. Remember, you're not trying to change anyone, fix their problems, or convince them of spiritual truth. You're simply maintaining awareness of what they truly are, regardless of appearances, which creates an atmosphere where healing and transformation can occur naturally through their own recognition. The third technique Joel taught involves handling challenging emotions through spiritual recognition rather than suppression, analysis, or resistance. When anger, fear, sadness, or any difficult emotion arises in your experience, instead of fighting it or trying to understand why it's happening, recognize your true identity. Acknowledge silently, "I'm experiencing anger right now, but anger is not what I am. I am the divine consciousness observing this temporary emotional weather pattern." This creates healthy space between your true identity and passing emotional experiences. You're not denying or suppressing the emotion, but recognizing that your essential nature remains untouched by any temporary feeling state. This allows emotions to move through your experience naturally without becoming stuck or defining your identity and self-concept. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? This approach transforms your relationship to all human experiences completely. You begin living as the conscious observer of your life, rather than the victim of circumstances, maintaining inner peace and clarity, regardless of what may be happening around you or within your human personality experience. The fourth technique involves practicing what Joel called divine indifference when facing challenging situations. This means maintaining recognition of spiritual truth regardless of appearances, while still taking appropriate practical action when needed in human affairs. For example, if facing financial pressure, you might acknowledge, "I'm experiencing concern about money in my human awareness, and I simultaneously recognize my infinite spiritual nature that lacks nothing and has access to unlimited creative resources and intelligence." This isn't denying the human experience or pretending problems don't exist, but maintaining awareness of your deeper identity throughout any challenge, which allows solutions to emerge from wisdom rather than fear, and creates space for practical guidance to appear naturally. Let's address the most common obstacles that people encounter when attempting to apply these teachings in their daily lives. The first major challenge is what Joel called metaphysical malpractice, which means using spiritual truth as a technique to get what your human personality wants rather than living from recognition of what you actually are. When you try to use the recognition of Christ within you as a method for manifesting desires, solving problems, or achieving goals, you're still operating from the consciousness of lack that believes you need something you don't currently have, which actually reinforces the very limitation you're trying to overcome. This approach usually leads to frustration and disappointment, because you're attempting to use truth rather than being truth. You're treating spiritual principles like tools for getting something, rather than recognizing them as descriptions of your actual nature and identity. The solution is shifting from using these teachings to accomplish things to living from them as expressions of what you are. Instead of recognizing Christ within in order to heal or prosper, recognize Christ within because it's simply the truth of your being, regardless of circumstances. The second major obstacle is having intellectual understanding without heart recognition. Many people can explain these concepts perfectly and even teach them to others, but they haven't actually experienced the transformative recognition that Joel was pointing toward in his writings and talks. They know about divine sonship, Christ consciousness, and spiritual identity, but this knowledge remains mental information rather than lived realization. There's still a sense of separation between themselves and the truth they're studying, as if spiritual consciousness is something they need to attain rather than what they are. This gap between knowing and being closes through consistent practice, but not the kind of effortful spiritual discipline that most people expect. It's not about doing more meditation, reading more books, or attending more classes, though these activities can be supportive. The recognition deepens through consistently returning to acknowledgement of your true identity throughout ordinary daily activities like cooking, working, driving, and having conversations. The breakthrough often comes in the most unexpected moments when you're not trying to be spiritual at all. The third obstacle is expecting instant dramatic results and becoming discouraged when transformation doesn't happen according to your human timeline and expectations. Joel emphasized throughout his teaching that spiritual realization often works quite differently than human planning and goal achievement. Some people do experience immediate dramatic changes in their circumstances and experience, while others notice subtle shifts unfolding gradually over weeks, months, or even years. The timing of outer demonstration doesn't reflect the validity of your recognition or your spiritual progress. The key is maintaining recognition of truth regardless of the speed of outer changes in your circumstances. Your spiritual identity and the reality of Christ consciousness within you aren't dependent on how quickly your experience transforms or how dramatically conditions improve. Trust the process of recognition while remaining committed to living from awareness of what you are, rather than judging your spiritual progress based on material results. Often the most profound and lasting transformations happen gradually, allowing your consciousness time to integrate new levels of understanding. The fourth major obstacle is attempting to maintain this recognition through willpower, mental effort, or spiritual ambition. Joel taught clearly that spiritual consciousness is your natural state, not something you achieve through struggle, force, or determination to be spiritual all the time. Forced attempts to stay conscious or maintain awareness through effort usually create mental tension and spiritual strain rather than the natural recognition of what you are. This approach turns spiritual recognition into another form of work that exhausts rather than refreshes your consciousness. The solution is what Joel called effortless awareness, which means simply allowing yourself to remember your spiritual identity when you remember, without guilt, self-criticism, or struggle when you temporarily forget and get caught up in human personality reactions and concerns. Like learning to play a musical instrument, consistent, gentle practice with patience and self-compassion is much more effective than forced, intensive effort that creates tension. Allow your recognition of Christ within to develop organically through daily acknowledgement rather than spiritual perfectionism. Now let's explore advanced integration of this recognition in daily life and relationships. When you begin consistently living from the awareness that Christ lives in you as your actual identity, every aspect of your experience starts transforming in ways that feel natural rather than forced or artificial. Your approach to work becomes an expression of your divine nature rather than a struggle for survival, security, or personal achievement. Business decisions begin flowing from inner wisdom and genuine service rather than fear, competition, or ego ambition that characterizes most commercial activity. You find yourself naturally attracted to opportunities and relationships that align with your spiritual values and support your highest expression, while situations that compromise your integrity or drain your energy naturally fall away without effort or dramatic confrontation. Your presence in meetings, social gatherings, and all interactions takes on a quality that others notice and appreciate, even if they can't articulate what feels different about being around you. People begin seeking your perspective and input for reasons beyond your professional expertise. All relationships undergo profound transformation When you consistently recognize the divine nature in yourself and others, rather than relating to people based on their personality patterns, past behavior, or current circumstances that seem to define their identity. This doesn't mean ignoring practical considerations, avoiding appropriate boundaries, or being naive about human behavior. Rather, you maintain awareness of spiritual truth about people while handling human interactions with wisdom, discernment, and practical intelligence. This combination of spiritual recognition and human wisdom creates space for others to express their highest qualities naturally. When you stop reacting to people's limited expressions and consistently see their divine nature, they often begin expressing from that higher level of their being. Many people report that family relationships that had been tense, conflicted, or distant for years begin healing without direct discussion of past problems or attempts to resolve old issues through conversation, therapy, or family meetings that often create more tension than resolution. Health and vitality take on entirely new dimensions when you live from consistent recognition of your spiritual identity rather than identifying primarily as a physical body that happens to have consciousness. This shift naturally supports physical well-being in remarkable ways. You begin making choices about food, exercise, rest, and self-care from inner wisdom rather than external rules, diet programs, or fear-based medical advice that treats the body as a machine that needs to be controlled and managed through willpower and discipline. Your physical form starts feeling more like a trusted vehicle for expressing your spiritual nature rather than a source of constant concern, limitation, or potential problems that might develop as you age. The body responds positively to being recognized as perfect expression of divine consciousness. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.